Well, hello and welcome. You probably just heard my dog barking in the background, testing the mic. I'm Danielle Smith, the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm delighted we're doing two podcasts today. The first one, we will be talking with Stephen Buffalo of the Indian Resource Council about his concerns over the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then at 12:15 today, we'll be doing a full seminar on the hydrogen economy and the opportunity for Alberta. So I'm pretty excited about this. I hope you are too. But why don't we get started first of all by letting me bring in Stephen Buffalo, who, as I mentioned, is with the Indian Resource Council as the president and CEO. He's also a fellow with the Macdonald Laurier Institute, and he joins us now to give us a lay of the land about what's happening in the House of Commons next week with the passage of this UN declaration and why it is that he and his members are so concerned. Stephen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you again.
It's so good to see you. So first, let's begin by talking, for those of you who don't know who the Indian Resource Council is, give us an idea of your membership.
Well, we're a group that started back in the early 80s, an advocacy organization that represented the oil and gas producing First Nations. And then since the beginning, we've been working with the Special Operating Agency, Indian Oil and Gas Canada, the federal arm that helps, supposed to be our federal trustee and manage our resources and our lands. And we advocate not only with the government but with industry as well. And we've certainly taken our place in this oil and gas sector. It's been good to a lot of communities that have benefited, and but obviously with some of the turbulence that we've dealt with along with our federal government, the new policies, it's been very difficult to make some money and to achieve what we call sovereignty, right? And it's this resource has been good to not only accommodate what the federal government funding doesn't do under the Indian Act, and we position ourselves to help the communities. Currently, right now, through the federal government and announcing the site rehabilitation program. The province, our good friend Jason Kenney, helped us with $100 million to accommodate our needs and our concerns on the First Nation lands and Métis settlements. 85 million to First Nations, 15 to the Métis settlements. So, that's a good start. As our federal government moves towards greener energy, it's about time we start cleaning our own lands. Our communities aren't getting any bigger, so we have to do what we can and take our spot. But that's essentially what we are.
Well, let's talk a bit, because you'd mentioned about, I think this may be a bit of a surprise, because oftentimes when we see First Nations leaders come forward to talk about development, it's because they're opposed to it. So you mentioned that oil and gas development has been very good for your communities. So can you map that out a little bit? Tell us the kind of things you've been able to do by having that revenue.
Well, you know what? Obviously, we learned the hard way through oil and gas, but lessons learned. But ultimately, it allowed us to accommodate. A lot of many Canadians don't understand how our communities are really funded, and it's under this. I call it soft communism under the Indian Act. But this oil and gas revenue, the opportunity came to First Nations, and it really helped us with developing our own programs for certain needs that we may have. And obviously, water issues have been one, housing issues have been other, and then more recently we're seeing issues with some of the social pandemics we have, such as opioids and such as murdered missing Indigenous women. This money gave us opportunity to try to address those social programs. And then as well, we want to help and assist our youth in sport and development and education. And and some of our communities that have benefited from oil and gas were able to set up, for example, my community set up a education trust fund. And we were able to help First Nation, our community members going into post-secondary with additional resources to be able to survive as a student and not only pay the tuition, and bereavement costs. We don't know how many people are going to leave us, and those are starting to really add up in a lot of our communities. And it really gave us our own sense of control of our communities. And like I said, our shareholders are different.
It sounds like it. Well,
So
maybe and can you tell us about that? Why is it that you've come to a different conclusion when you're looking at how you balance the development of resources, particularly oil and gas? But forestry is also one of those areas that seems to be fraught with environmental issues too. But how have you come to the conclusion that you can balance those when some other communities haven't? How do you see the issue differently?
well, obviously, like oil and gas is all around us, and we're seeing the revenues, and money walk away. That's in our traditional territories and our lands, and we've had to find that balance. And yes, there's environmental disruption, but ultimately, when you work towards the reclamation part, that says a lot, and that's one thing the environmentalists never hear about is the reclamation work that is now being more stringent and regulations in regards to that is very stringent and very probably the world's best, and we have to be able to take what we can from Mother Earth and to be able to accommodate our future generations. And obviously with how things are moving now and becoming more green energy, there's been a push for that, but also there's different utilizations for some of the opportunities such as cogeneration projects and things like that, geothermal. I know a lot of our communities are looking into that before we really jump into the solar, into the wind farm and all that kind of stuff. But you know what, we appreciate going into a greener space, but in the same sense, when you see companies still benefiting huge in and around our communities, we want to be a part of that because, again, we have needs too, right? And it's as long as things are the way they are under the Indian Act, where we have to find a different means to get away from that type of control.
Well, there's so many exciting opportunities. I'm kind of interested in knowing about your relationship with environmental groups because I think a lot of environmental groups have done a lot of good in raising the issues and getting local communities active. But it does seem like in some situations they've taken it a step too far, and now they become anti-development as opposed to responsible development. I want to see it. I want to understand how you see it.
Well, absolutely. We recognize the same kind of position. The environmentalists, absolutely, we want to protect the water, the trees, the animals, even the insects. But in the same sense, we see the opportunity. Again, not too many Canadians understand how our communities are really functioned, and to find those revenues and to address certain needs that we need to accommodate. We have to really invest into that. But moving forward and dealing with some of the environmental movements, we take for granted that they do have a message, and we keep that in the back of our mind while the development is happening. But in the same sense, we can't take an all or nothing approach. There's no way. We shut off oil and gas today. I don't know where we'd be at. And our positioning right now with the green energy, I think we're still 2 steps behind. Even though some people think that they can live in that kind of a space, I find it difficult to see. Like even our own elderly people, they appreciate turning up the heat in the winter time. They appreciate flushing a toilet. As crazy as that may sound, because the old days was a little bit harder. And it's really, the oil and gas and advancements become more efficient, like even in our hunting and trapping, they're not running dogs anymore, or they're not paddling boats. They got higher powered engines, skidoos and watercraft that are powered by a gas powered motor. So, and that's based on efficiency, right? And it's really how we adapt and change. And that's one thing is that we have to adapt to how the things are coming in around us. And it's for some people it's hard, but you definitely see the environmental groups that are really supported by outside influences that are really clamming it down our throat, that we need to completely stop. And to me, that's really not a starting point.
Well, and this is why I'm very torn about this UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because there are 46 sections in there, and so much of it goes a long way towards addressing the issues of reconciliation that we all care so much about. But there's one line in there that seems to be causing all of the issues, and it's that we must have free, prior, and informed consent. And it seems the way in which that's being interpreted is exactly as you've described, that it's more to stop any kind of development as opposed to finding a way to accommodate everybody's interests. So first of all, let's see if we can talk about the positive of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People so that we understand why it is that the federal government is so keen to pass it in the first place. And then we'll talk about that problematic clause. But as I understand, so give us the time frame on this. It was first introduced in 2007. I think we affirmed it in 2010, but where are we at now in the process of adopting it?
Well, from what I understand, it's gone past second reading. And you know, it's now to the Senate. Actually, just got a message yesterday to appear on the 28th. So you know, obviously, you want to give our input. But I've been through this before with Bill C-69 and Bill C, the tanker ban. I can't remember.
The C-48, yeah.
48, yeah. You know what? And quite honestly, the arguments supported by First Nations in and along the coast, everyone had the arguments to the Senate to not pass those bills, but yet they were still passed. So in my view, like, even though we're going to have this opportunity to speak, they're going to still pass it, you know, and quite honestly, it's somewhat concerning when we can't find that balanced approach.
Yeah.
And you know what, it's if you're not willing to listen to some of the concerns and really like get into the meat and potatoes of really some of the issues, why we're wanting to stop it right now. It's I don't know. You know, a good friend of ours, Mike Binney, says there's this movement that will never happen in Canada, and then it's the other side is it's happening in Canada, and it's I guess an approach our federal government is moving. And really, you know, the hard part is the reality is that it's going to really take away our process to say yes. You know, like obviously we see what's happening with the infrastructure projects that are happening now, TMX, the Coastal Gas Link. You know, there's communities that want to see it done that have agreements, you know, and see some true financial benefit and not only pipeline monitoring opportunities. Again, you know, regulations in Canada are world class. And you know, to trust that these regulations are there to help protect us and our people being a part of it, and as it goes through their territories and communities, to me is a positive. But again, you know, we have the environmental movement to say, and everyone's talking about the stereotyping of man camps and how the pipeline will blow up. You know, so this declaration is definitely going to have some impact unless we help define, like you said, you know, the one statement, you know, the FPIC, the free, prior, and informed consent. You know, I have a little story about that. You know, back in 2016, we hosted a conference called the Pipeline Gridlock Conference. And it was downtown Calgary at the Hyatt. And we were like, I got phone calls left, right, about from these environmental groups. Greenpeace was even planning a rally outside the hotel, you know, and I got emails, calls, threats. You know, I was threatened, and I've been called everything under the sun. You know, Earth Killer was the title that really hurt me. and but in the same sense, so you know, at that time, I had two young people from a community just outside of the city, Indigenous people, that told me I did not have their free, prior, and informed consent. You know, and these are young people. And of course, we knew that they were part of these environmental groups. And so at that time, it woke me up to say, hey, he's asking for this and he's not even an elected leader. Funny thing now is he's an elected leader. So,
boy.
You know, and at the time I was thinking, well, I don't need your free, prior, and informed consent. You know, your community has a gas station. What are you talking about? You know, and you know, the hypocrisy of some of our environmental friends, you know, that they still rely, just like me and you, on filling up the vehicle to go down the road. And they still turn up the heat in their house with natural gas. You know, they're not out, you know, they're living in a house as opposed to a teepee or something, that's wilderness. But this declaration has a lot of good things in it.
But Steve, before I leave that, because I do want to get to the point of talking about the positive, but I think we have to address this issue of the interpretation of free, prior, and informed consent. Because for those of us who operate in kind of the Canadian democratic paradigm, I know that I, as an individual, can't tell the government, whether it's my municipal government or my provincial government or my federal government, I disagree. Therefore, you're not allowed to do that development at all. So we sort of accept that we elect people to make decisions on our behalf. It gets debated out. We win some, we lose some, but we allow for our elected leaders to make the decisions, and it goes forward. I'm trying to understand the paradigm that is being described, that we saw with the Coastal GasLink. That even though we had elected councils that were signed on and wanted to go forward with that project, that there were hereditary chiefs from the Wet'suwet'en who said no, and that was enough to create all the disruption that we saw with the blockades on the rail line, as well as the disruption in the pipeline. And so help us understand what we're missing in the way in which those kinds of issues are perceived, that is outside of how we normally make democratic decisions in Canada.
Yeah. So, like through the history of the Indian Act, upon signing on and taking the money under the programming of the act, electing a leader has been kind of the norm. And of course, we criticize ourselves calling that a democratic process and colonized process. We're colonized, through the Indian Act because we take this money. And in some communities, we've developed our own election law, and we've kind of said that we put it through referendum. Again, another colonized process. But, in my view, it's probably one of the right ways. That's my own personal view. And when you go to some of the communities in British Columbia, some of the nations, they still practice their hereditary chieftainship. And by all means, that's fine. They as long as it's recognized in other communities know, and again, through this colonized system of the Assembly of First Nations, they see that and they acknowledge it as well. Now, when it got to that point with the Wet'suwet'en and the Coastal GasLink, yes, the hereditary chiefs did stand up and say no to the process. However, the elected leaders said yes to it. And we have to kind of respect that system because they do acknowledge the hereditary chiefs as the deciding factors for the clans, because they still operate under a clan system. And once you're part of a clan, you take the advice of the leader. And again, because the Indian Act money is tied to a democratic leadership election, that's kind of how they are. So from what I've been told, they've been kind of working together on resolving this. But also, we did find out that, there's still some influence from the environmental groups, third-party interests to really kind of misrepresent that whole system. I just hope that, and it didn't help our federal government only acknowledging the hereditary chiefs. But maybe that's what they were supposed to do. I don't know. I just hope soon enough that they find a resolve and things continue to progress, not only for the interests of those nations across on the corridor, but for our whole industry in Canada.
I love the way that you started with this story and the anecdote, because I think people can see that there's a difference between a clan structure that is recognized and has buy-in from the community versus two young kids coming up to you saying, I've got veto power too. But that's the problem, isn't it? Is that if it isn't defined, then any individual who aligns with the environmental group of the time could say, I haven't given you my personal consent, therefore everything's off the table. And that doesn't seem appropriate either.
Right. And that's kind of what we got to try to weed through, right? And really point it out. And again, everyone that has something to say about pipelines has something to lose or to gain, right? And in actuality, if there is something where a pipeline can be diverted to avoid say a cemetery or traditional burial ground, of course we want to support that. And of course, we do not want to put any water aquifers at risk. Even despite our regulatory process through pipelines, not only pipelines, maybe highways, railways, transmission lines, all of that. We just want to make sure that, it makes common sense to do the right thing if it needs some diversion to a different route. But that's industry and First Nations working together, and it's the regulatory bodies of the federal and provincial governments acknowledging and doing that.
And I guess that's part of why I'm wondering about your perspective on the UN declaration, is because I think there's a sense that unless the government formally adopts that those formal consultations and that constructive decision-making process with respect for local conditions and First Nation rights, it won't take place otherwise. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, it seems to me there's been amazing progress in the relationship between how industry approaches development issues than perhaps what we saw in the past. Maybe there's still more work that needs to be done. But is it the case that the only way to make progress is to pass this declaration?
It's a tough one, because like I said, there's some good things in the declaration that, from a human rights standpoint that, since that need to be addressed, but in the same sense, though, we're fighting this ghost, I say, through the environmental movement. And it's really making it difficult to help and make a logical decision for both parties, right? Excuse me. And you know what? I just want to make sure that when the intent of stopping something based on environmental issues is met, and it's true, then yeah, we have something to stand on. But if it's because someone's telling you and we're paying you to do this, to stop it, so we're landlocking Canada's resources, then I have a problem with that.
Yeah. Let's talk about, you said that there's some positive in the declaration, and I think that there obviously is a lot of support for it. Otherwise, the government wouldn't be going ahead with it. And so I want to know what the positives are from the declaration, so that we can zero in after the fact, because it looks like it's probably going to pass, but zero in after the fact on this problematic clause to figure out how to solve it. So where do you think that this declaration makes some good strides? What should we be looking at from the positive point of view?
Well, obviously, since, I don't know, I guess maybe the Constitution, acknowledgement of our treaty rights. And a lot of us, First Nations, we're still holding those documents, because one, Canada has not fulfilled hardly any of the issues that were agreed to. When when the land was given up, we were told this much depth of a plow, right? You heard our national chief say that. And then in comes in the NRTA, right? The National Resource Transfer Act. And our representation back in 1932 wasn't there, to kind of, I guess, argue the point. And you see the developments happening in and around our communities, and we're stuck on these reserves and these land masses, and we need permission to leave. So from a human rights standpoint, it recognizes that we had rights. And it was proven. A Supreme Court has made rulings to acknowledge our rights in our lands. And it really prepared us to be a part of the big picture now in this natural resource space. And again, but even still yet, we still have a lot of problems. And from a human rights standpoint, are we still protected? I don't know. I would say no. Like I always reference the young man that got shot in the head in Saskatchewan. And we use the court system of the Canadian government, and a farmer walks away. Is that really protecting our human rights? I don't think so. But again, there's a lot of work in regards to our languages. The residential school and the impact it plays. Like I can speak my language to a point, but it's the ripple effect is my kids can't. And that's the ripple effect of that residential school. So there's something in the declaration that allows us, and like also I think it's Article 46 that allows us to say yes or no to certain projects, right? And it really gives us an opportunity to be a part of the equation, I guess, when we talk about some of these big projects such as pipelines. And again, from a standpoint of the human rights, it's very good. But again, when you whittle it down And again, our environmental friends, they found the one statement, the free, prior, and informed consent, that really brings down,
Hmm.
that whole initiative and whole good work that has been done. Because I know, like, Willie Littlechild is like my second dad. He's been working on this document for years, and he's working to the UN, and it's been very, very good. So it was hard. It was hard to tell him, yeah, you know what, there's a problem here, and he wants us to support it, and we do support it, because again, there's some issues there, but I think the how the federal government has been moving towards implementing it hasn't been done properly. We talk about this free, prior, and informed consent and consultation, and it hasn't been done with the First Nations. It hasn't been done with the communities right at the grassroots level, and I think that's what needed to happen. Right now, they're scrambling to push this through.
Hmm.
And a good friend of mine said, this document is a Trojan horse, and he says it's gonna take away our ability to say yes to projects. And I kind of agree with that.
And that's, I guess, where the problem is, isn't it? Is if you're in a community where you're inclined to want to say no and don't want development, then maybe you won't have a problem with it. But if there isn't an avenue to make sure that you can get to a yes when the majority of the community want that as well, then that's got to be resolved. Now, I guess here's the question. So do you think the only way to resolve it is to stop this bill from passing and then work it out? Or do you think it can be consulted on after the fact to make sure that those communities who want to go forward and say yes have the ability to do that?
Well, I think you can. It's yes and no. Like, there's some low-hanging fruit that really makes sense. And it's really what makes sense is education. What makes sense is language programs, and I think we can definitely move towards getting those through. But when it comes down to this free, prior, and informed consent, there could be a possible amendment. That can be passed by, say, democratically elected leadership or a hereditary custom system that has full authority from the people by referendum, says yes, something like that. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but at the end of the day, there's a governing body for the people that is going to decide yes or no.
Okay, so when you go give your testimony to the Senate on May the 28th, what are you going to tell them?
More or less the same thing. Again, like, I definitely support a lot of the issues in principle to the declaration, but it's just this one sentence, free, prior, and informed consent, and we just need some amendment or to change it. And again, we're just an advocacy body. Ultimately, our leaderships and our communities need to make a decision. And right now, I guarantee you, they're confused just as well. Because they see some of the struggles through human rights, and they see the opportunities in and around their communities, that they can be a part of if they position themselves accordingly. The business opportunities are coming; they're here. You look at our province in Alberta, and what our premier has done is set up the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, which really basically provides a loan guarantee for a community to be part of a project. And right now, we've got three projects that are BC First Nations benefit. Again, it's a lending security support, but it's there, and it really gives industry and First Nations that ability to work together, supported by the government without really giving the money. And it's. So these things are in and around us. These opportunities are coming, and we just have to be kind of ready for it. We want to be sovereign. We want to be sovereign nations. A lot of First Nations want to get off the Indian Act. They want to look at different opportunities, and the natural resource sector provides probably the biggest opportunity. Like the green space it's there, and quite honestly, to me, it's still hypocritical to the CO2 emissions and all that kind of stuff, but. At the end of the day, if there's an opportunity to generate our own power and to be able to not be dependent on socialistic issues, but really to look at investment, look at wealth generation, that's what we're hoping for. And this document right now just needs a subtle amendment, in my view, before it can really move forward.
Well, I'm so glad you've decided to step up and make the arguments. And I wish you luck next week. And thank you so much for spending some time with us so we could understand some of the concerns you have with it.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for having me. And I miss your show, but I read why you walked. Everyone's. It's a funny time we're living in right now, right?
Isn't it just?
It
Well,
is.
I'm glad to be here and glad to be able to still have conversations with you. I always appreciate talking with you. Thank you so much again.
You bet. Take care.
You got it. That was Stephen Buffalo. So as you heard, I think the takeaway that I have is that the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People started off with the notion of addressing some of the thorny, longstanding issues, as well as moving towards reconciliation. But there's one line in there that has been interpreted by some of the more extreme and anti-development environmental groups to act as a bit of a veto over any development project. So when you've got a group of chiefs who are interested in bringing jobs and prosperity to their community, what they're worried about is now, as we're just moving finally down the path of reconciliation and job creation and wealth creation, that this is going to act as a stop to that. So the bill goes to final reading, it sounds like next week, and then on to the Senate. And you'll be able to hear more from Stephen Buffalo and others as they bring forward some of the concerns. So we'll take a quick pause. When we come back, we will be talking about the hydrogen economy and the opportunity for Alberta. I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group.